All right. Welcome to Powerssquared, Raw and Real. I'm MA Powers.
And I'm JL Powers.
We're gonna try and wrap this thing up. I have decided. I want to talk about other things. As fun as this is, of course, we'll always come back to religion, but because it just kind of is a part of our everything. So whether we believe in it or not. What?
Yeah, the funny thing is that this has been our most popular thing ever. I mean, we have a lot more views on this particular topic than any other topic.
Sure.
Of course, we've learned a few things. I mean, we're still pretty low tech, but now we actually have the title up, you know?
At least on my end, it's not working on your end today. That's all right. I don't think, like, if people want, slick production and high quality audio and really like well thought out and texted production, then they ain't gonna get it here.
Well, you don't go to something called Raw and Real.
Right. I hope not.
Qualities.
Yeah. But anyways.
All right. So let's talk about
Sure.
the last of your experience. So we were kind of in your college days.
Right. So towards the end of my college days, I started dating a very nice girl who I then ended up who was also very evangelical, and I ended up moving after I graduated to College Station, Texas, where I was involved in a very evangelical church where I was playing the piano and the bass and doing music, and my girlfriend was really involved in InterVarsity, and then we got engaged, and then we got married, and it all happened, like I'm saying, it kind of happened that way. It was really fast without a lot of forethought. Unfortunately for us, I think we grew up in a family that believed the thing that would keep you together in marriage is your belief in God. Like, there's always hard times in marriage, but when two people come together and they believe in God, that they'll always stay together. And so that was kind of like, I didn't ask a lot of real deep, important questions about getting married to this particular person, not because just because I kind of felt like, well, anybody you married is going to be flawed, because that's what we believe in religion, and it is true. Everybody is flawed, but that doesn't, there's always going to be friction, and they don't even have to be flawed. I mean, I'm flawed, everybody's flawed, right? So we know that, but some flaws are don't complement each other, and some do. So anyways, a long story short,
Can I interrupt for a second? Because what's interesting, you just said you didn't ask a lot of deep questions, and you sort of had this belief that
right,
two people believed in God, or maybe even more pertinent, were devoted to Jesus or devoted.
Exactly. Right.
And it would all work out because, but we've also talked early on in the series about this sort of evangelical belief about God's will, right?
Sure.
Did you feel like you were praying, was this God's will, or was there not a sense of that because you had this other belief that if both parties believed in Jesus, it would work out and all of that?
I never, I didn't really have a real sense that like God wanted me to do anything at that point, actually. Maybe that was because I was already struggling with things, but a little bit, but really under the radar, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of more deep down and not out. And I was what?
Is on the down low. You were not like letting.
I was very down on the down low, and in College Station, Texas, that's where I also learned that being evangelical and being a conservative political person was very they went really, really hand in hand. And so, in fact, so hand in hand that when I met one, he was an Indian. He was actually wonderful. He was a very bright student, who was a graduate student, and he was actually a Christian, but he wasn't conservative at all. He was actually quite liberal, and he basically was from India, and it was just so shocking for me to meet a liberal Christian. Like, I mean, it just like it was shocking to me to be like, oh, this person doesn't agree with George Bush. He doesn't like, none of this makes, like, he just is flat out like, I think that being more socialistic is better for people. And just like that dissonance of being like, oh, but he goes to this really evangelical church. He's very evangelical, and I can tell he really believes in his faith. And you could kind of write it off as, oh, well, he, grew up in India. He's not American. But then, and then I think really subconsciously that started to work on me too, where I started to realize, wait a minute, maybe Christianity, not that I had ever said it out loud. Nobody ever says this out loud, but it's kind of the unwritten rule that if you're an evangelical Christian and you're really like gung-ho about your faith, you're also conservative in the political realm.
In America.
In America, right.
What's interesting about the dissonance that you were experiencing was, in a way, you were sort of writing off his liberalism as like lesser than this version of Christianity that you understood to be the pinnacle of Christianity, which is essentially American evangelicalism,
Sure.
and not Christian. Like, it's a very specific cultural subset of Christianity,
right?
And yet, among evangelical Christians in America, it's offered up as the kind of pinnacle of Christianity, or the correct or true way, or whatever.
Sure. And so that was shocking, but I could write it off because he wasn't American in a way. But then also, I didn't write it off, actually, and I'm glad I didn't. I really thought about it, and I really, it stuck with me, even though I didn't like try and start looking up liberal Christian thought. I didn't, I didn't do that. But I started realizing, wait a minute, maybe, not just realizing, but it started coming to the forefront of my consciousness that Christianity and this evangelical culture are not necessarily, they don't have to go hand in hand. They just don't have to. Like, there's nothing that says, there's nowhere in the Bible that somebody says that you have to have an American version of economics, or that you have to have this this particular way of thinking or doing anything. Like, there's really no basis in the Bible about evangelical Christianity at all. I mean, it's not, I'm not saying that they're like, it's a heresy or anything, but it's a made up culture, just like any other Christian culture. You start bringing in baggage over the years, and all of a sudden you start thinking this is orthodoxy, when in fact it's just a tradition that you've carried in the church for a number of years.
Do you think if you had started looking up more liberal Christian thought, or Christians in America who were liberal as opposed to conservative, do you think there's a possibility that you might have remained Christian?
Yeah, I mean, like, I suppose so, but nobody would call me a Christian who was in, my past, right? So does that really mean I'm a Christian, right? Like, accordingly. So, like, they wouldn't consider those people Christians anyways. So so I guess it depends on what you mean by a Christian, because by those measures, maybe I still am a Christian. I don't know. It's like, it's not like I reject Jesus, or like, I don't go out of my way and I'm just like, no, this is just all wrong and false. I just don't, does that make sense what I'm saying here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm a Christian. I'm not saying I'm not a Christian. It just depends on whose definition you're talking about, right? Because I'm not sure of the actual, I guess, knowing more about how even more about how the Bible came about and how we think about Christianity makes me less fundamental in my view of any one scripture as to, like, did that actually happen, right?
Right.
As opposed to, is this a teaching that we're learning about? And so, anyways, that's kind of a tangent, I guess. But
No, but I mean, it's sort of, it is interesting to think about because how do we define Christian? And
sure,
like when you say, I don't reject Jesus, what do you mean by that? Do you mean
right. I mean,
still like his teachings? I don't
right,
necessarily
right,
know if he's God. I don't know that he
right,
rose from the dead. Like,
right, right, right.
there's a lot of things that
Exactly. So I don't know what that means exactly, even to me, because there's parts of what Jesus said that I'm like, I don't know about that, right? And other parts that I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've come to preach good news to the poor, because that, I mean, I've come to bring good news to the poor is so, on the face value of it, it seems so um, almost benign, but
Mhm.
it is so incredibly radical and just culturally shifting, and so just a huge tsunami or earthquake within the thought of the people of the day. And still to this day, that somebody would be like, no, I'm not here for the wealthy, I'm not here for the powerful, I'm here to bring good news to the people who need it. I'm here to bring good news to the poor, the people who nobody else. And so that kind of thought, yeah, that still resonates with me in a lot of ways. I don't and some of the ideals of love resonate with me. But yeah, was he God? Is he the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through him, except through God? And then whatever that interpretation means, like, does that mean that unless you believe in the orthodoxy that he is God, or you can believe he was a great prophet and still come to God? Like, there you go, right? So now we're parsing down what it means to be a Christian in a way that I think can be very destructive.
Right. Well, not destructive to us necessarily.
Right. I
Basically,
mean, intellect. I mean,
essentially, once you
right.
start questioning all of those things, most of the people in the camps that we grew up in would be like, "Yeah, you couldn't be considered a Christian anymore."
Sure, and definitely not a leader in the church, and that's okay. Okay.
Well, so actually, well, I want to get back to like this time because you're
Sure.
to this time where you're married, you're
Right.
in College Station, Texas, you're part of the evangelical church, you're encountering
Mhm.
this person now, but you're being very quiet about whatever doubts
Right.
are coming up. And I'm curious about that because of course, during this same time period,
Right.
I'm the family black sheep, right?
Right.
I'm, you
Sure.
know, I moved off to New York with a boyfriend,
Right. And it didn't.
which
It
was
obviously did.
horrifying. That was
Right.
not, but was horrifying to the family because, you weren't supposed to move in with somebody and
Yeah. And
married. I
right.
was clearly like moving away from Christianity. I was like, didn't know what I thought anymore. I was the black sheep. What were you thinking about all of those things? And was there a
I
part of you that thought, oh, I could express these doubts, or were you afraid to because you saw what happened to
Right.
me? I mean,
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure it was ever quite that out in the open, exactly for me, but none of the stuff that you did bothered me that much. I mean, sure, you know, I personally didn't think Green. Well, I shouldn't say his name. I personally was not fond of your boyfriend, not but I wasn't not fond of him either, but there was no connection. And so I was just kind of like, well, I don't know about this guy. Like,
Right.
so personally, I was not invested in it at all. Yeah, my only my only questions were more like, I wonder, what the attraction is. There's an attraction there that I don't know about, and that's fine. That was more my idea. I didn't get creeped out or anything particularly. I mean, I realized, oh, okay, Jessica's like probably is definitely moving away from Christianity, and I didn't know exactly what to think about that because I was still really involved in Christianity, but it didn't bother me like hugely.
Well, that's good. It seemed
I
to
don't
bother
know
a lot of
if
other
it
people,
seemed to bother me. I don't know if it seemed to bother like, but we weren't nearly as close as we are now, obviously. But I don't know. Yeah.
anyway, I was just sort of curious because you had that, but yet
Right.
you were
So
keeping like those
right. It
doubts.
didn't take long. Like I started graduate school and things started crumbling immediately. Like everything started kind of crumbling immediately. I realized this is not a good relationship for me to be in, and that it's going to be really, really hard for me to get a divorce and disentangle myself from this. But um, and it's going to hurt a lot of people, including myself. And this is not good. And this is not what is the ideal in the Christian world. But it's better now. It's going to happen. So let me do it now because we've only been married for a pretty short period of time.
Like a year and a half.
Yeah, like a year and a half. Like if I'm going to do this, I need to make the decision now because if I like keep on being like, well, maybe I'll work this out or maybe things will be better, I could see it continuing to devolve. And then I would just have to make the choice later when it was harder than earlier. And I realized if I'm thinking this way right now, I really don't want to have children with this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't be physical with this person and I can't be um pretend like it's okay,
Mm-hmm.
right, with this person. And so things fell apart really, really quick.
So, I mean, your marriage was falling apart, and was
Right.
your marriage falling apart partly because you were also leaving your faith, or was leaving your
Yes.
faith
Yeah, it was
byproduct
all
of
intertwined. Yeah, it was all intertwined because I realized like the everybody's argument for me to stay married was of course a religious one.
it? Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm not sure that's a good enough argument. It just isn't for me. And I remember thinking at the time, like, nobody knows what's going to happen to you when you're, people like literally had people tell me if I got a divorce, I would ruin my life for the rest of, like it was going to ruin me for the rest of my life. Like,
Yeah, and
literally told me this. And I was like, well, I just don't know, or for eternity, right? And I
right,
was just like, well, I don't know, and you don't know. And they had I literally looked at some people in the face and said, you do not know what's going to happen to me, and you don't even know what's going to happen to you when you die. You think you do, but you just don't. Nobody, the only person that we think died and came back, the only people that have died and come back that we know of are things that we believe about from the Bible. Everybody else who's died has stayed dead. And so nobody's going to come and tell you, there's no way to know what's going to happen when you die. So you may believe something, but there's
so
a
for
huge
people,
difference. But the problem is also I was in graduate school, right?
right?
In an evidence-based scientific world that I realized that I resonated with also, and realized, I can't stand up and just BS people in graduate school, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can stand up in front of people I could stand up in front of people and say, this is what I think is going on, and this is how I would approach it, and this is how I would try and figure this out, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
would never, ever tell somebody, well, when I do this, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
Because it never happens, and you would get destroyed. Like I'd get destroyed. I'd get torn up, if I tried to do that in front of people, tell people that I knew what was happening, because they'd be like, well, then why are you experimenting on it?
Right.
You only experiment because you don't know what's happening. And if you don't know what's happening, you don't know what the outcome's going to be. You don't. You think you're hoping it'll be something, but there's a huge difference. Is hope is not reality.
Right. Right.
I can hope I'll win a Nobel Prize, but it ain't going to happen unless I win a Nobel Prize.
Right.
So, yeah, I was
So were
confronted.
people telling you basically that you were going to go to hell if you got a divorce?
Um, I'm not sure. With some people, I think more that I was just ruining everything, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I don't. It was a really hard time. It was really, really hard time. Really hard time. It was a hard time with the family. Like I think um, it was just as hard, if not harder, than when you moved in with Greeno. I
Oh,
mean,
I'm sure. I think it was harder. It was hard.
yeah, it was really, really, really hard, and I had nothing comforting to say to people because they were all coming at to me, from a religious standpoint, and I wasn't gonna defend their viewpoint, and I wasn't gonna take it sitting down, because I realized real quickly this was gonna be really, really, really difficult,
Right.
and I was only gonna make it worse for everybody if I tried to placate the situation. That, like, once I made my decision, then I needed to go full bore, because that would be less painful for me and less painful for everybody around me in the long run, even if it was more painful in the short term.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that was really bad.
Yeah, it's
You
hard.
could attest. You were there.
I know I was there. It was a really hard time. And like in a way, it's as though your break with Christianity was cannot be separated
No,
from your divorce.
no, it was very intertwined. It was a divorcing in two ways. In fact, I even told people basically almost that, right? That, like,
I'm
I
getting a
can't.
divorce
It
from
was it was all
Christianity.
intertwined. I
I'm getting a
couldn't.
divorce from Christianity too, kind of.
Exactly. And, like, I can't live with this person who is so intertwined with it when I'm divorcing from this. I just can't do it too, right? So it was all very, very intertwined, and difficult, and I feel I still, one thing, and I knew it was going to be this way, and one thing I can still say without a shadow of a doubt, that it's not painful in a, like, a pricking sort of way, but it's painful in a like bruising kind of, like, um I had to do what I had to do, but you still feel like if I could do it, like,
It's all shitty. It's
yeah,
just
it's all shitty, and you still are like, if I could do it all over again, I would. And that's a terrible thing. Like, I wish I could be the kind of person who is like, meaning that I wouldn't have got married
right, right.
in
It all
the
over
first
again, you
place,
would have
right?
stopped things earlier in
Yeah,
the
much, much, much earlier, right? But and I wish I could be kind of one of those, and I'm just not. That's the problem. Is, like, I know so many people who believe that everything is done for a reason and for a purpose, and that gives them great comfort. To me, that scares me because of how many horrible things happen to people. Like, I don't think there's a good reason for that, and I don't think that anybody should have to go through that. There's no lesson learned by torture for people. There just isn't. Like, there's no good reason for it. not everything has a reason, not everything has a purpose. And that's actually more comforting to me. And that was, I think that was hard. Like, um, I still deal with people with that all the time where they're like, well, God must have a reason for this. And I'm like, I don't think so. Yeah, why would God have a reason for this? Because it's just terrible. Like there are things in this world that there are no good reason for, just flat out. There's no reason. And you I mean, obviously you can learn. Anybody can learn from anything, which is unbelievably resilient, but that doesn't mean that they're better off for having gone through what they've gone through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the one thing too, that like on the other hand, I also got people in the scientific world who keep on, they're like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I'm like, that is also a lie. Like, if your leg is cut off, you are not stronger after. Yes, you survived it, but you're not stronger. You now only have one leg, which means you can't do a lot of things, right? Yes, you can make up for it, and you can feel like you're compensating for that through your grit of character or whatever. But like on a raw physical, you're just not stronger.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a catastrophic brain injury, you're not better. And then the wound for them is to look at them in the face and say, if you've already worked 80 hours this week. If you work 90 hours this week, it's not going to make you a better person. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it's going to make you a weaker person, because you can't stop, and you're just going to get tired or more run down, and you're going to be a less of a good person because of this. But the answer is always, no, people were really awful to me in my dissertation, but I survived it. Like,
Right.
yeah, but you're scarred for life now mentally, so like that's not true either. And so there has to be a medium where you do learn from awful things, but that you also acknowledge that not every terrible thing that you survive makes you stronger.
Right. Or that it had some divine
Right.
purpose, or yeah.
Right.
So, I just wanted to comment real quickly that even though when I kind of started leaving Christianity, it was not intertwined with a divorce, although it was intertwined with moving in with a boyfriend, like,
Right. Right.
sending
Right.
this sort of message, like, the values that you've set out for me are no longer the values that I'm trying to live my life by.
Right.
But I will say that leaving the church very much felt like a divorce to me as well.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I went from that experience, and then I was involved in the Catholic Church for quite a while, but that's a different beast entirely, since you can show up at a lot of Catholic churches for months and months and months, and nobody
Knows your
will
name.
care. Nobody knows it, and they're like, oh, he's like me, he's here, and he may believe, he may not believe, but I get something from this, whether or not there's any real like what we would have in the evangelical church, which was like, no, you have to like be 100%, 110%, which is impossible. But if you're not 110%, then you're not a real Christian. Whereas in the Catholic Church, you can be like, 5 or 6%, and people are like, oh, that's, hey,
Hey.
you still showed up. And I got that from priests and everybody who was like, I'm not sure what I think of, like, it could be anything, I don't know what I think about, like, veneration of the saints. And I'm like, yeah, that's not for everybody. Like, okay. Maybe I was just in a very liberal Catholic diocese at the time too. I think things are a little different out here in the East, but in the West it was very like not quite I think what started freaking me out actually was towards the end of living in Salt Lake City was seeing these undergraduates who were coming in who were just like unbelievably um, conservative Catholic, like
Mhm.
to the like creepy end. And I was like, yeah, I don't think we want to go back to the Latin rite services. I just like, I don't know why you would want to do that. Like, that seems like a huge step backwards for like public like participation in the mass, but you know, whatever. Like, all right, you can have your once a month Latin mass if you want. I don't know which priests actually know Latin anymore, but I'm sure they're out there. Yeah, it was kind of strange, but yeah, I guess ever since going to graduate school, it does, you know, I think being being skeptical should be part of your training in science because you are basically trying to disprove anything that you come across. That's the best way to convince yourself that what you're actually pursuing is correct and not just an anomaly of the data. So you're trying to do things to the nth degree to prove that what you got before was incorrect, you know. And so that's just part of your training, and it kind of sucks because it's hard to get anything done because you're always, any little thing that you do and make one step forward, you're just like hammering it to try and disprove it or prove it in like 6 different ways. But on the other hand, that seeps over into your religious life, right? Then all of a sudden you're like, you know, I can't take some of this, I understand, and I just take verbatim, but some of this I can't just roll over and just accept it. I just can't. And that makes you a really bad Christian. Because I mean, it's built on faith. They tell you that, but then you're like, but if it's built on faith, I could have faith in anything. Like, there's nothing, you know. And of course, there's a whole section of Christianity devoted to apologetics, but there's also a huge section of Islam devoted to apologetics, and there's also apologetics within the Hindu religion, although it's a little bit different. But you know, like,
Right,
yeah, there's
right.
Catholic apologetics, there's, you know, Protestant apologetics, there's, and so and for those of you who don't know what apologetics are, it's just it's like the intellectual, it's supposed to be kind of the intellectual underpinnings of what you believe. So
Yeah, the reasons. It's
right,
supposed to be a reasonable, logical argument for
right,
faith. Um,
right.
yeah. Well, so you know, you left the church, you got
Sure.
divorced, you
Right,
started, you know, you became Catholic for
right.
a number of years. Um, your time in the Catholic Church was um,
It was actually mostly positive, although um you know, towards the end here, we were just like, we can't be a part of this because unless, you know, we can't be a part. Like, I can't even go to mass with the bishops, the American bishops being in charge because they're just so awful.
yeah, it's the corruption in terms of the child abuse and the hiding
Right.
that.
And the total complete lack of like real comprehension to this. And like, you can't, you know, if you just, some people keep arguing that I know that, you know, the way to change the Catholic Church is to change it from within. And I'm like, you know, they're the only way they would change if people left and didn't donate money. That's just, and I'm like, it's sad, but that's the way it's gonna be. Like, if half the American Catholic Church just left tomorrow, there would be huge changes. The bishops would no longer be here. These bishops would no longer be here, and they would take it seriously. So,
Right.
but beyond that, like I would, you know, um, yeah, that. So, you know,
Well, you know, I mean, I think uh, growing up in evangelical churches
mhm,
the way we did, it was not quite the same institution of the Catholicism, which has, this enormous infrastructure and set of bylaws and laws and a whole legal system and
Hierarchy.
hierarchy and all of these things, and that's lacking. I mean, you do have these other denominations within Protestantism that have hierarchy and organizations and bylaws and constitutions,
Sure.
etc. For example, the Baptist or the Southern Baptist Convention or the Presbyterian Church, etc. But we were going definitely to churches that were very deconstructed from a lot of that,
Right.
and might have it internally. And there's a certain like it's just one church or maybe two churches that are linked together, and they might have some set of accountability within leadership, but there's not like a huge hierarchy over them.
Right.
And there's there's some really interesting things about that. Because you can't talk about the evangelical church in the same way that you can talk about the Catholic Church, because it's not,
yeah, for sure.
this hierarchical organization with bylaws and a legal structure and all of these systems of getting people into place and all of that. But yet it is still this very strong culture. But there's a flexibility that went along with that, but also a lack of oversight. I mean, I've certainly heard horrific stories about abuse and things that happened, to people in evangelical congregations. But when you think about Catholicism, what's interesting to me is it easier to change evangelical culture because you've got it's
so nebulous though?
It's so nebulous, or is it just as difficult? It's hard to imagine how the Catholic Church would ever really fundamentally change when it's got such enormous layers and levels and structures, and it feels like to change it would be almost require something like an earthquake of dramatic proportions, and it's had some of those, but yet still doesn't seem to change it. Like the revelations of literally thousands and thousands of children that have been abused, and yet has it changed, or is it in the process of changing, or is it going to go right back to what it was? It's hard to say. I'm not Catholic. I'm not within the system, so I don't want to say because I don't know. But all I'm saying is you just look at that huge institutional structure, and it's hard to imagine how it would change without kind of demolishing that structure. But on the other hand, I don't know how easy it is to change evangelical culture either.
I think evangelical culture does change much quicker. I think it's different than it was when we were kids, and I think it'll be different in 20 years in the sense that there's no oversight to keep it in a certain way or going in a certain direction. So who knows, maybe there'll be this huge liberal or strain or something that comes up with younger people that that will change the culture within it, and that's fine. I think whatever. I think I could see it happening, I suppose. But it is interesting because I think we're part of the first wave of people who really aren't going to church much anymore. It's just kind of happening more and more. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to go like Europe. As far as Europe, I mean, obviously the US is lagging behind. But the Europeans are much less churched, and for good and for bad. And so I think there's a good I don't know. There's a good chance the wave of people kind of leaving or just not showing up anymore could happen. And if that does, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you almost have sometimes there. Sometimes when you are the majority within a culture, you kind of struggle in a way that you don't when you're a minority in a culture, when you're religious. And I know that sounds weird, but you almost have to be more authentic, I think, when you're not the majority, for whatever that means. So who knows, maybe I don't know, maybe. But then again, I suppose that could push sometimes when you really become a minority, it pushes you into extremism. So hopefully,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the bottom line for us is that I I don't see myself ever returning
right,
to
right,
evangelical Christianity, or to Catholicism ever, because
right,
I briefly
right,
became Catholic and didn't really ever truly become Catholic in that sense. I have for a number of years gone to an Episcopalian church, but I pretty much recognize that I don't know that I believe most of what is taught, but I do want to give my son a spiritual language, and that's the one that makes sense. Like I didn't see myself running out and becoming Buddhist because that just culturally didn't feel like it fit to me. Um, but I also couldn't possibly bring myself to go to an evangelical church, and I
right,
couldn't bring myself to be Catholic either. And so I don't know where that's going, but that's where it is. I don't see myself ever moving out of this place of real doubt, and that might be really sad to some people, but
right,
it's not sad to me. Like I'm okay with it. I'm okay if I move a little bit closer towards the realm of faith. I'm okay if I move a little further away from it, but I don't imagine ever becoming a diehard atheist, and I don't
right,
ever imagine becoming
right,
a
right.
diehard Christian.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
like I actually
right,
feel pretty comfortable in this place, and I don't mean
right,
comfortable in the sense of I still question things. I still have
right.
questions. I'm not comfortable, but I'm. This is a place that I feel like I can live in.
Sure, sure.
A place of
No,
doubt, of uncertainty.
right. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it just when you said back, moving here, moving there, the one thing that I thought was kind of funny is that when I was in graduate school, of course, I that's where I really started bumping into the real asshole atheists. And they're an extremist group of their own, and it is so
Right.
funny. They're very zealous and religious about their atheism, and they have no doubts about it. And I'll never go in that direction either. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They're a funny group. I laugh at them. I actually had a lot of they didn't have none of them offended me. I have sympathy for them. I just also had to laugh at how like them like how much vitriol and assholishness they could produce about religion in like a split second time, and how funny that was to me. It actually made me laugh periodically, and because it was like, no, they had to get their point across that Christians or anybody who's religious is bigoted, stupid, and the reason why everything is crumbled throughout all of history. So yeah, it was an interesting group of people. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah, no,
get in
no,
there.
no. It is. It's interesting what people choose to be religious about sometimes.
Yeah, they were definitely
I think we talked just this last week. You sent something.
right.
I don't know if you ended up posting it on Facebook or not,
Yeah,
but and then I read this interesting article too that kind of talked about this. About these days, it seems like people are very religious about their political beliefs.
yeah. I think did you send that to me or you
I
read
did
it?
it. I sent you a link to this article.
Yeah.
It was I can't remember where it was published. It was
Sure, sure. And we've talked about it. I need to read that article. But we've talked a little bit about it. Yeah, they were replacing religion with
sort of
politics.
fanatical devotion to their particular
Right,
political
right,
cult, whether it's liberalism or conservatism,
right.
whether it's being a Republican or being a Democrat.
I think we live in that weird world between the two also. I know because neither of us are comfortable with rabid Republicans or rabid liberals. Since I feel like they make snap judgments about people so quickly and are willing to crucify individuals at a split second's notice in a way that I think is is bordering on evil almost.
Pretty humane. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I posted a little something on Facebook, which I typically try and avoid posting political or religious things on Facebook because I feel like it
Right.
does quickly devolve into ugliness and I wasn't. It actually was pretty okay, but I
Yeah.
wasn't disappointed entirely either because I did see, yeah, this could quickly get real ugly here, and so
Yeah.
at some point I just sort of shut it down by thanking everybody. But it was interesting to me. I mentioned on there that I, tend to vote third party because I
Right.
really dislike the two-party stranglehold that we have in our system, and I usually find that I can't ethically embrace the candidate for either the Democratic or the Republican parties, and I said I hope I don't get crucified too badly on here for this, and somebody came back and said, I think I feel like it was okay for Republicans and conservatives to vote third party in the last election because they needed to vote their conscience because they just couldn't support Trump. But it's just not okay for somebody of a liberal persuasion to have voted third party in the last one. And I did not respond, but I wanted to say, so you're telling me that it's okay for conservatives? You're not a conservative. She's,
Right.
liberal. It's
Right.
okay for conservatives to vote their conscience because you were so opposed to but it's not okay for me to vote my conscience. I'm like, I
Right.
own
Right.
my
That's
conscience. Don't
right. Right.
tell me
Right.
that I'm not allowed that I have to hand over my conscience to those of you in the liberal party who are saying this is the only acceptable,
Right.
candidate. And it was just really interesting to me. But that was an example to me of, she didn't get particularly rabid about it, but it was an example to me of the types of things that you see that I feel like are very almost religious
Right.
about politics these days. Like, well, sorry, but I'm not going to hand my conscience over to you and say,
Right. Right.
you know, I
Right.
I didn't vote my conscience. I voted for the people that the party said I should vote for.
Right.
I didn't vote my conscience. I totally embraced groupthink and um,
Right.
let go of my conscience to vote for the people that they said I should vote for. It's like
Yeah,
okay,
it doesn't make a lot of sense. That I have one scripture for us to leave on.
okay.
That'll be funny. It's in Revelation. I can't remember exactly. It's in the first or second chapter, I believe, of Revelation. And um, it goes something like this. I'm paraphrasing. God would prefer you to either be hot
Or
or
cold.
cold. But if you're lukewarm like you and me, he will spit us out of his mouth. So
Okay, I guess we'll just
we'd be better off to be asshole atheists or full on religious, all right? None of this lukewarmness, all right?
I guess we'll just have to lie here in a big pile of God's spit.
Yeah, we
Well, at
all
least
right.
we'll be full of saliva together.
Right. Great. And if you know the scripture, you can post it underneath this for us. All right.
Yeah. All
Thank
right.
you so much. Well,
So next one,
yeah, this has been MA Powers.
JL Powers.
Over and out.